Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. Right now you're hearing music by Nick Lavelle, made with my VHS Drums Ableton Live Pack and my Microcassettes Ableton Live Pack. Both of these packs were made by recording drums to VHS tapes and synthesizer sounds to a small microcassette recorder and building those all into Ableton Live instruments. You can get those packs at my store, AfroDJMac.com/store. And if you use the code podcast, you'll get 20% off on your purchase. Make sure you check out Nick's site, mybackroombeats.com, for some very nice music production tutorials. How's it going, everybody? And welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk, and this is the show where we talk about making music. And today, I'm very excited about my guest today. It's David Frangioni, and he is quite a lot of things, actually. Started out as a drummer, got into music technology, forefront of MIDI, working with all kinds of artists, building studios. Pretty much, it's a who's who of rock and roll history, the artists. We've got Aerosmith, the Stones, Ringo Starr, Elton John, Sting, Bryan Adams, and the list goes on and on. And he's also just released a book called Crash, the World's Greatest Drum Kits, from a piece to Pert to Van Halen, which is sort of a historical documentation of some of the cool, exciting, over-the-top drum kits in rock and roll history. So I'd like to welcome David to the show. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be here. Very excited.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time.
Well, it's my pleasure. I love sharing stories about what we're all passionate about. Anything music, technology, production, artist development, studios, from geek to to gear to making the music itself. It's just there's nothing better.
Yeah, and you've definitely had your hand in basically every aspect of the process, I'd say, from drumming, from engineering, from the technological side. It's really, and now business as well too, with Audio One, the production studio. This is like kind of doing everything. I'm fascinated and impressed and curious how you managed to put that all together. How does that come to be?
Well, it evolved.
Yeah.
Where, my first goal as a very young man, as a child really, was to be the world's greatest drummer. And in my pursuit of that, I found technology at first, of course, through drum-related applications, and then evolving that to full studios and rigs and even facilities over the years. And being a drummer, being someone who loves drum rhythms, loops, and all aspects of music, from playing in the Greater Boston Youth Symphony to the New England Conservatory Jazz Band to rock bands. As a drummer, I found that I had a lot of different styles of music and a lot of different passions within that really got me excited and I was interested in, and I wanted to pursue as a musician, and then later on as a producer, engineer, technologist. And then it just all, as my passions grew and I found new things that I was passionate about and interested in, I just pursued them to the fullest extent, worked really hard at understanding them and being good at them. And then, of course, taking whatever X factor that I have in my creative ideas and applying that as well. And really the greatest compliment I ever got was when Noel Lee of Monster Cable and the co-founder of Beats said to me, "David, you're a true Renaissance man." And that was years ago. And then it hit me like, wow, everybody doesn't get involved in all of these different things like I do. This is, I guess, a little different. Most people pick a lane and drive down there, but I've picked many different lanes. But in my heart and soul of passion and pursuit of these things, they all are related. They may be different lanes for a lot of different people's careers, but for me, doing all of them and doing all of them well really felt natural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like the work of many people when we talk about your career and what you've done. not just one single individual.
Well, it's a great compliment. The interesting thing is, if we go back to Caravaggio, or some of these Italian uh, early Renaissance men, and they really, as an artist, he got his own canvas, he made his own paint, he created his own brushes, he created tools that didn't exist in order for him to finish a sculpture. So the whole creative process, from the really technical geeky part of putting the tools together and making them work and inventing things if necessary, all the way through the finished painting or sculpture, was not uncommon for these artisans hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So it's, for me, it just happened to work out that way, that it's a kind of a similar approach, where I was on all sides of the situation, of the glass, you could call it, or both sides of the glass, but all sides of music, technology, and all the things related. So if you look at, like, when I built a studio for Ozzy Osbourne, I was involved in designing it and installing it and putting the whole thing together turnkey. And then when it was finished, I worked in the studio and basically tested it with Ozzy, and at the time Mark Hudson, who's working with him, and then Ozzy's full-time engineer came in, Bruce Sugar, who would steer the ship after I finished. But that's an example of how I put all the technical stuff, that I was kind of the only person in the camp that knew how it all worked. But then I trained Ozzy's team and even worked with Ozzy behind the console, where I'm engineering, I'm doing Pro Tools, all these other things, to test the studio, but we're also getting real work done. And then when the whole studio project was finished and he was ready to start a record in it, I went into he and Sharon's home and did all the AV and made sure all of that was working. So, you could look at it like, wow, that's 4 different companies and 4 different people, each with their own specialty. And in a lot of cases it is, but what I've done in my career, the way I've built it and the way that I've pursued my different goals, it's one person and then one company, in the case, as you mentioned, Audio One, where we have this really unique position where we'll go in and we'll do a home theater, which we also did for Ozzy, and then a whole home automation and all things recording studios, digital facilities, Pro Tools rigs, recording rigs, backline rigs, etc. And it's been a very interesting journey.
Yeah, I'd say so. I have to imagine it's, I could only wonder what a studio for Ozzy Osbourne would look like. What kind of stuff, top of the line?
Well, you don't have to wonder as much as you think, because there was a big feature at the time in EQ magazine. So if anybody remembers EQ or wants to go back and look at the archives, there's probably some stuff online. At the time, of course, it was print. And EQ magazine did a cover story on the first studio I did for Ozzy. I ended up doing 2 because he moved. But the first one was the first studio he ever had, which I was shocked, because I've been an Ozzy fan my entire life. And from Black Sabbath to his first solo album, Blizzard of Oz, and all of the different projects he's had, such a huge Ozzy fan. And when I got the opportunity to work with them, I was shocked to find out that someone with his legendary history and so many recordings and projects that he's done, he didn't have his own studio.
Yeah.
So what a great honor to not only work with him, but be the person that built his first studio for him and his second studio.
Yeah, that is actually incredible. But I suppose he's, has access to all the best studios himself. So maybe.
Oh no, he absolutely he does. He has had and still has that access. But he wanted to work at home, and he wanted to have more flexibility, and it worked out great. It makes so much sense for an artist to have their own professional studio at home, because when you amortize it and you look at the money side of it, what you invest in yourself, as opposed to giving money to an outside studio when you're busy, when you're working on records and projects and stuff comes in all the time. A successful artist has voiceover requirements, phone interview requirements. A lot of times their music is featured in films and they want to oversee the edit that's going to be used in the film on top of their recordings, their singles and their albums. And maybe they want to listen back to live music they've done and critique it and figure out the set list for the next tour or the next leg. There's so many applications that an artist has that are not technical. It's not that the artist is thinking like, what Frank Zappa had, where, he was actually on both sides. He's doing the music and he's able to sit at the console. He's got a very technical minded approach, had a very technical minded approach. This is not that at all. We're talking about what the tool can do for the artist by having the convenience and and save all the money of having to go to a commercial studio every time. So it's made a lot of sense. And I think that combined with the fact that I was able to put together very easy to use studios. So even if they were extremely well, facilitated in terms of how much power the studio had, how far you could take it, I made it so it was very easy to use. And in some cases, the studios were actually for, they were actually for artists to use without an engineer. And in other cases, they were to be used, with an engineer. So we figured all that stuff out at the front. We figured out, is this going to, or maybe it was going to be a hybrid, is this going to be a studio that that sometimes the artist needs to use by themselves and other times they're going to bring in a real engineer. So, those are kind of the three scenarios, no engineer, part-time engineer, full-time engineer. And I would adjust how the studio was put together based on what the needs and requirements of the artist were.
Well, I guess that gives them a lot more flexibility too with their work. And
and it allows them to use it the way they intend to. Yeah. So a lot of times studios that are primarily writing rigs, or maybe some final vocals, those would be more along the lines of the artist would use it themselves, and it wouldn't be based around a really technical person coming in like a trained engineer or Pro Tools operator. It wouldn't be based around that kind of person having to run it. And then as you get more sophisticated in the needs of the room, we start to figure out, okay, at what point, do you want to bring an engineer in? And the fact is that the artists understand that language. You don't have to be a technical person in any way to have a conversation about, hey, do you want to write songs in this room by yourself? Yes. Okay, great. I'll take care of the rest. Mm-hmm. Do you want to cut final vocals? Yes. Do you want to cut them by yourself, like rewind, fast forward, punch in? No, I'd like to bring my guy in for that side of it. Okay, so I'll make sure the rig is perfect for you up until the point you're going to cut finals. And then I'll base the rest of it around an engineer coming in. And then there are other artists that say, I'm going to be doing all my work in the studio. I want to stay entirely creative. I've never gotten behind the console when I'm in the studio other than some mix tweaks. So build this around that criteria, and I'll always bring my engineer in and have them up at the house when I'm working. So that becomes more of really a pro studio in a home location. And they all work great based on what the artist's needs are. I've done hundreds and hundreds of them, and they've all turned out real successful for what I was hired to do. So that's the key.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I like that you tailor it to what they plan on using it for too. It seems
ahead of time, right? We don't want to, measure twice, cut once. Right? So that's the philosophy, is like interview twice and then design once.
Is there any particular studio that stands out in your mind as a favorite for any particular reason?
Oh, there's lots of them. There's so many great moments that I've been blessed with having between the Aerosmith studios and Ozzy and Olivia Newton-John and the guys in Styx and Journey, and so many great memories. There's a beautiful studio in Grand Cayman called The Mill. That's absolutely state-of-the-art, gorgeous in every way. the location, the views, the technical
Yeah.
aspect of it. Just a world-class studio. I'm really proud of that. And just a lot of great rooms. I mean, they're really based on the artist or the owner's vision of what their goals are, and those goals, as we're talking about, are musical. They're the career based goals. They're not technical.
Mm.
I'm the translator. As the
Hmm.
music technologist, I translate. Oh, okay, you're going to cut an orchestra here. I translate that to, okay, I'm going to make sure they have over 300 tracks. And I'll make sure they have this much IO. I'm doing all the translation from what the creative goals are to what the technical needs are.
Right, right. Yeah, so like the classic story of John Lennon telling George Martin that he wants to sound like the Dalai Lama on a hill for Tomorrow Never Knows. That's your
Yep.
job to like how are you going to set that up? What are they going to need
Right.
for that?
Right. How do you take what's in
Yeah.
their head and their creative genius and actually turn it into a tangible result that realizes what they're describing?
Hmm.
That's it. And you see how much that translates not only in the recording studio process, but in the home automation process, the home theater process, the production process, the artist development process. So all of these things that I'm involved in full on are much more related than people realize, because it's the same mindset and approach. When an artist wants to be successful and they ask me to come in and do artist development with them, I'm figuring out what their natural talents are. I'm figuring out what their real zone is. And in some cases, artists are all over the map when they're still in their formative time. And that doesn't mean age. This is more of where they are in their career time,
Mm.
not their biological time. And they won't even realize, wow, I've been kind of bouncing all over these different styles, or I've been focusing too much on this instead of that, or I've been chasing trends instead of figuring out what trend I want to actually create. And I'll go in, and it's a very deep dive, and it takes time. There's a whole process to it. But, there's a lot of similarities that I've learned from taking artists through the process of translating technical, or as you mentioned, that great story with John and George, that, when you're in the studio and I'm producing and the artist has ideas and says, oh, can it sound like this? Or can it do that? Or, they're referencing another album that they like, that they overall wanted to have the vibe of.
Mm.
That's all extremely valuable feedback. And you got to know how to translate that.
Right. Yeah, it's often in very abstract terms, and that's where you come in, huh?
Yes, absolutely. And whether I'm wearing the producer hat, the technologist hat, the studio builder hat, they're all very similar translations, especially after, I'm over 35 years of working on all these different things and working very hard at them and
Mm.
working very diligently and consistently on them. It starts to become a snowball of just putting it all together and being able to not only figure it out and do it well, but do it well in a speedy fashion, so you can get results, even faster for the person with whom you're working.
Right. That's a theme that comes up a lot. The hard work and consistency, this idea of the magic break or this sudden moment, just it doesn't seem to be real.
It's not, but it's well. Let me give you a much better answer than it's not. There's context to it's not.
Sure.
The break, as you described it, and as I hear it all the time, is framed in the context of all of a sudden, someone came in and took you from the first floor to the penthouse, and it was one elevator ride, and boom. The reality is there's a lot of stops between the first floor and the penthouse, and every one of them is a step in the journey that has to be taken. There's no seed you plant and the next day it's a gorgeous palm tree, no matter how much you water it and no matter how much of a great gardener you might be. there is a period of time that must pass to go along with the greatness of gardening and watering. And that really is how it works in anyone's career. What happens though is nobody really pays attention to the palm tree until it's fully grown. And then they go, oh my God, what a gorgeous palm tree. That's incredible. It's the same thing with an artist. All of a sudden the artist is all over streaming and the radio and et cetera. And then it's like, oh wow, this is a new artist. And the fact is, it is a new artist because no one heard the artist before. But their break was a series of events that all were part of their growth. And eventually it led up to an ascension where the final, move to getting national recognition, was that next step. But it never stops, right? Because just like when you look at a band like U2, when they first came to America, or the Police first came to America, they're playing clubs, and they're playing, little bigger clubs, and they're playing theaters, and then they're backup band for an arena act, and then they get their first arena tour, and every one of those steps, and then they get to stadiums eventually. So at each step, they're more well known, and it looks like another big break to get from here to there, but they're really just steps in the journey. And as the steps get larger and the breaks get bigger, it's just more people hearing you. But you're working really hard and creating those opportunities by doing that work. If you take U2 and you try to say, okay, they're going to come to America, and then they're going to be headlining arenas first time. No one's ever heard them before. They haven't been on MTV yet. It doesn't work.
Right.
You got to go through those steps. And that's the credit that you have to give to acts like that do the work, that stuck with it, even when it wasn't glamorous, and even when the clubs, were smelly and small and didn't have a lot of people in them and everything else. But you persevere and you say, hey, I'm going to go to the next step. I'm going to stick with it. I know there's a bigger end zone here. And then eventually you get that quote unquote big break. But there's a lot of stuff you got to shovel before you get to, the point where you start to have a name.
Yeah, we could put your name on the marquee at Madison Square Garden, but no one's going to be in the seats. Unless you work up.
Exactly. No matter how much money you put behind it. And in some cases, no matter how hard you work, until a certain period of time passes where you build it. You gotta, there's no, everybody loves to use the word overnight sensation. There's no overnight sensation. There's just overnight awareness where all of a sudden, oh, okay, now a lot of people have heard of this band or act, but it's grown and grown and grown.
I think that concept is, with like social media, YouTube videos going viral and things like that, I think more and more people think that there's this thing as the overnight success, the sudden thing that's just going to make it all happen. But I hear more people always say like, oh, yeah, overnight success. It took me 15 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah, well, and that's the truth. And, you see acts on YouTube, et cetera, that become influencers. And that is a new, a new segment to success and the approach and the journey to success. Of course, with social media being virtually instant access, it makes sense. But, longevity is also really important. If somebody's really successful for 2 years, I think that's great. But if they're 12 years old and they've been successful for 2 years, there's a long way to go to see if this is something that's going to survive the test of time. And do you want it to survive the test of time? Do you want your child to be a star after a certain period? It's okay to say, hey, this was a moment, but now let's create new moments that aren't necessarily in the spotlight, or vice versa. Give them an education earlier on and give them artist development in terms of music and their artistry. But once the education is set, then flip it and really focused on the artist development. And if it doesn't fly as an artist, then you could go back to whatever you learned in your education, your educational years, whether it's high school, college, etc. And the fact is that I've never been a plan B kind of person. I've always felt from my approach that don't stop with plan A until it happens.
Hmm.
But you have to have plans. You have to have contingency plans. You have to have course correction plans, and not everybody is set out to be an artist. A lot of people set out on that journey and they end up being incredible producers or songwriters or engineers or band members.
Right.
And other artists set out on that journey and become, Frank Sinatra and Elvis and artists that just, just the universe had it that those are going to be artists. There was no holding them back. They were even phenomenon. So some people it's in the cards to be artists, and the journey that they're on and the path that they're going to take is that. And others start there and then go somewhere else. And it's all valid. It's just whatever your calling is, whatever is, it turns out that's really in your heart and soul and what you're going to do for a career. It always works out for the best.
Yeah, I guess it's a little easier to see the path sometimes looking back. And then, moving forward, it's very hard to tell when you're looking ahead. But after a while, once you've kind of made a path a little bit, you see how it all makes sense. I think
that's right. And you stay aware. If you look at my own journey, being a drummer and thinking for so many of my formative years as a really young child, starting at 2 years old, thinking, I'm going to be a drummer, and I want to be the greatest drummer I possibly can be, and studying with guys like Joe Morello and Alan Dawson and Lester Merle and Rod Morgenstein and Louis Belson and these phenomenal drummers, and really working hard, practicing and improving and playing in bands and cover bands and doing hundreds and hundreds of gigs, well over 1,000 gigs by the time I was, in my teens. And then finding technology kind of happenstance because I'm trying to improve my drumming, and electronics were becoming integral in drumming and we're in the 80s now. And then I find technology and really find my passion in it. And I'm like, wow, this is so creatively stimulating. There's so much to learn and so many things you can do with it musically once you do learn it, and immersing myself in it, and then becoming a producer, and then building recording studios and MIDI rigs and keyboard rigs to entire facilities, and then adding home theater to it, and then adding home automation to it, and then adding artist development to it. It was all just a series of growth and evolution that were all connected. And so, as you said, and you're absolutely right, you just keep your eyes open and you stay aware and you follow your passion and your heart, and things start to weave together. But at no time when I was 16 did I say, okay, well, I'm going to become a MIDI technologist, and then I'm going to grow that to be an engineer and producer. Then I'm going to get a gig with Aerosmith, and then I'm going to be, good and I'm going to build recording studios, and I'm going to start a company, and that company is going to be the biggest company in its league for what. And all of those things, yes, they had vision to them and they had growth and evolution, but they were much shorter time periods of vision to execution than seeing a big picture at a young age, because you have to go through certain experiences before the vision starts to become clear.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I relate to that myself, and just some of the things that I've gotten into in my own life. So just so you know a little my background, I do a lot of music production, home studio stuff, and teaching a little bit of music technology with Ableton Live. Is kind of I'm a certified trainer with them. So
love it. I need to brush up on it, so I'm going to call you.
Oh, please do.
Outside of this podcast for some lessons.
Yeah. Oh, I'd be honored. But what happened with me? I'm also, as my day job, a high school English teacher, and as I've done my music my whole life since I was a kid, and then got into teaching, now I'm starting to see these roads unintentionally intersect and finding a lot of satisfaction in it. And something like, I guess that, like, especially now as the technology has changed with the internet, but these are just things like you just don't even imagine years and years in the past as a kid or whatever it is. I didn't know these were options. And they just, you kind of find yourself arriving at these things as they show up. And I think that's a part of your story I connect with a lot and find really fascinating. that's how it worked for you, starting with the dream as the drummer and then finding a lot of stimulus and inspiration in some of the, like, I guess, like more unexpected spots that you don't always hear about, or that might not have even existed just a few years back.
Well, that's 100% right, and that's exactly what it's exactly what I'm saying and exactly what I'm talking about. It's funny when you said English teacher, like that was one of my favorite subjects growing up. It's like I still love to read, and like English is so I have a passion for that. I really do. Now it's all shown through reading and writing these books, but back then it was through pursuing like whoever the best English teacher was in every grade. That's who I wanted. Like that was really, my brother was a math science guy and I was an English guy. But you're absolutely right. It's so self-prophesizing, as you described in your journey, you're pursuing these different paths, and then all of a sudden you realize how connected they are and how they lead to more growth, more evolution. And it could be something you did, 3 years ago or 3 components ago. There's no real linearity to it other than it's your life in a linear fashion, each of our lives. But the different things that we do can seem random, but I think the key thing is just having that awareness, right? It sounds so simplistic, but you'd be surprised when you're going, and I've done this in my life many times. You just go and sleep, and then get up and go. So like self-awareness is not so easy to practice as much as it's easy to understand that you need to. But when we do have these self-aware moments, and the more we have them, the better it is, the things that you described happen, whereas you can really start to connect the dots. And of course, that famous speech that Steve Jobs gave at Stanford, where he talks about connecting the dots, it's so profoundly on point. That's what I love about, one of the things I love about that speech is what he was saying was so deep and so on point, where, here he took these classes that just didn't seem to have anything to do with anything else other than, okay, now I learned calligraphy, or I learned this, or I learned that. And then as his career evolves and he starts to piece together why he learned that and how it applies to these big picture visions and goals, that's when you really just say, wow, life is awesome. I'm blessed. And I've got to, I just want to keep going. I want to keep giving. And, it's one of the things when we talked about my crash book earlier that, that's one of my recent projects that I'm out telling the world about. I set up a website, crashbook.net. And I hope everyone that's listening to this will take a second and go, because you can win a free copy of Crash, because I really believe that you give and you get. And it's a two-way street. It's the reason I started Frangioni Foundation, my nonprofit. So I want to do good. I don't want to just have good results and clients and projects. I actually want to do a lot of good to and for the world, as much as I want to see success come. And that's why I set up crashbook.net. But it's all this cyclical give and take that really just fuels, how we can contribute and the amazing things that each of us can bring to the world.
Yeah, very true. And if you think about things coming together, I think that by giving so much, you're right, it just comes back around, and even it's its own reward in itself too. That speech, the Steve Jobs speech, is incredible. I show that to high school seniors, and just to get them a little food for thought, as they're kind of like peeking over the wall of the high school, looking at this real world out there.
Great. It's great. That's a huge service you're doing for them. And if you take the time, which I don't know if you're doing this or not, so I'll just make it as a suggestion, but you may already be doing it. If you take the time to actually try to translate some of that as well, because that speech took me 20 years of understanding to hear that speech and really get it and really see it. And if I had heard that speech and I was 17, right, and I was going to leave 17, 18, whatever, and I was going to leave high school, 5% of that speech I would have kind of understood. And the other 95%, I didn't live enough. You
Right.
know, I didn't have enough actual mileage to really be able to understand just how profoundly valuable that speech is.
Mm.
And again, like we talked about earlier, you got to plant the seed, and you know there's time. And as we're watering and gardening, whatever our goals are, you know, that's the process through which we're experientially really starting to get what Steve Jobs described in that
Mm.
speech. And you really don't ever get that speech in totality until you have enough years and growth under you to really see what he was saying and how much how valuable that was. And he was talking to a college
Yeah.
crowd, and you know they still were probably being challenged to really figure it out at the level that you can get what he's saying, because you know they were really just still in school for another 4 years, right? But as you said, when you peek over the fence or the wall and you start to see the real world, you're not in a classroom anymore.
Yeah.
And you know there's a lot to learn and a lot to you know to really kind of get before
Yeah.
you can navigate the jungle.
Yeah. I like to tell them you're leaving the classroom here and you're going into the real classroom now. Now you're
Yeah,
really learning, and that
that's right.
speech,
Amen. And
is
life is a classroom. Every day is a learning adventure, and there's so many new things coming at you. Even if they're disguised a little bit, and you think they're new or old, but when you really get under the hood, a lot of things, you know, are just variations of something else. And so the more
mm,
quickly you can determine that, the faster you can respond to it, and hopefully create a successful result.
yeah, it's stuff that I try to apply to in my own life, and you try to you get excited to share it with the kids, and it's it's a lot to take in. Like you said, it's for myself too. I mean, just if we use that speech as an example again, every time I hear it, every year, I'm like, whoa, it hits another level, and I do try to emphasize this idea that and I'm sure you've got stories. I mean, you've got a ton of successes, but I'm sure also there's hard times and challenges along the way. But sometimes it's a
Oh,
matter of how you
absolutely.
frame your mind and see it as a learning experience, a growth experience. And you're going to inevitably suffer and hit these difficult points. It's what you do with it and what you turn it into.
Well, that's 100% right. And the ups and downs are life.
Hmm.
You know, you can't, no one, no matter how successful you are, no matter how rich and famous you might become, and no matter how healthy you are, all of those things being blessings to certain degrees, especially number one, our health. You know, there's life still has ups and downs. You know, people you love, you know, are born, are you know, they die, you know, they're sick, they have their own successes, and you celebrate with them. And there's highs and lows. It's part of life, and not you know neither one are easy.
Hmm.
So people just think of, well, oh, what's so hard about being incredibly wealthy and incredibly famous? A lot of things are really hard about it. You know, look at the 27 Club.
Oh God, yeah.
And you know there's so many, so it's not just lows are a challenge, it's highs and lows are a challenge. And how you live your life and how you deal with those highs and lows, so that you're in your own mind, body, and soul, those highs and lows are balanced, so the lows don't bring you that far down and the highs don't bring you that far up, so you can create your own steadiness and deal with it. And you know that takes, again, self-awareness, learning, and taking the steps, and finding some mentors who can guide you along the way, and give you the tools to be able to navigate those things and stay healthy minded, no matter how hard things get or no matter how great things get.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an important one, right? Because we think the highs are that's what we think we want, but so many people have found, and like you mentioned, the 27 Club, the tragedy of realizing that it's not everything you thought it would be. There needs to be that center inside, that core that's sturdy. It's not the outside things.
Yeah, It is, and I know we're getting a little far away from production and technology, but I have to say this is just as important to anyone
Yeah.
listening, because you can be the greatest technologist in the world, and you can be the greatest producer in the world, but you're human, and what we're talking about are things that humans need to know in order to be better humans and better at their craft. Quincy Jones said, "Your music will never be better than you are as a person."
Hmm.
And he's absolutely right. So what we're talking about is really, for those listening, please, don't tune out, because we're not talking about how to do sysx commands and what the coolest flange effects are on a guitar lead for a mix. There's things that are even more important than that, because they give you the strength and the foundation to create these cool mix effects and these cool technological feats. But it starts with each of us as a person.
Yeah, that's well put. I'd actually like to ask you a question on this road a little bit. As I'm looking at, when you started working with Aerosmith, it says on your page on 1989 to 2002.
Yes, I still work with them to this day, but that was the run where I was with them, all the time and doing steady projects. They're in-house guy.
Yeah. So I know in their history, that's a time of big change for them too. I mean, they, notoriously a little wild in the early days and
Yes.
had a lot of difficulties, but
Yep.
it was
I started with them during the sobriety.
Yeah, so during that time period was a time where they started coming together as individuals and as people. I guess I'm not sure what my question is, but how did that seem for you from your perspective? Was that something you noticed that helped them in their creativity and their work?
Well, yes, for sure. And they were growing much faster than I was at that time, because they were older than me and much more tuned into getting the right guidance and mentoring and having incredible people around that could really help them get sober and stay sober. And then that opened up their channels to be able to create and stay together as a band and really get bigger than they ever got. They were huge in the 70s. You don't get much bigger than Aerosmith in the 70s until you look at Aerosmith in the 90s.
Yeah, right.
and beyond, right? They're just, they're doing a residency in 2019 in Las Vegas, completely sold out. And so the band's bigger than ever almost every year. And that is a result of the fact that they've stayed together and they stayed sober, and they were really, doing a lot of work on themselves personally, professionally, musically. So yeah, being able to see that was so much education, learning from the genius of Steven and Joe and Joey and Brad and Tom, learning from the genius of the different writers that would come in and work with them and producers. It just all was an incredible time in my life, because it was such an incredible time in their lives, and just to be a small part of it, something that I'll take with me forever. And it pays dividends every day in terms of knowledge and experience, because I learned so much from all those years working with the greats, and still working with greats today. And you just learn and apply it. And, it really exponentially improves, which, as a teacher, exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's cool to hear, because I was in 4th grade when Pump came out, and that was one of those records, the music videos and everything, where I was just like, whoa, like that's something people can do with their life. You can be like a rock and roll star like that. And they just had such a huge impact on me. And I think the first cassette tape I ever bought was the Red Greatest Hits Aerosmith tape.
Oh yeah, iconic. They sold a gazillion of them. I had that record too. Pump was the first project that I worked on with them. Just Push Play was the final album that I worked on with them. So my run was Pump, Get a Grip, 9 Lives, Salt of Sanity, Big Ones, Just Push Play, and and then a myriad of soundtrack cuts and amusement park rides and tour rigs and on and on and on. They were a very, very active band at that time, creating new music and new projects. And since then, they've done a lot of that too, but most of it's been based around their legacy stuff as opposed to newer tracks. But at that time, that was all new music. Pump, what a record. I mean, that to me is one of the greatest rock records of all time. And Get a Grip too. And so, Crazy and Crying and Amazing and Loving an Elevator and What It Takes and all of these songs, those were new songs when I was working on them. Janie's Got a Gun and Falling in Love is Harder Than These and just Don't Want to Miss a Thing. Now they're classics, but then that's what the music was that we were working on that was new.
Yeah, those songs have been with me my whole life. Even What It Takes especially was a big one for me. I loved it as a kid, but as I got older, going through like a breakup, and it was just, it's amazing how powerful it was. Pulls you right through
you
those
and me
situations.
both. They both had, incredible impacts on our lives.
So we got to get to your book for sure, because this is a really awesome collection of rock and roll history, really.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited about it. Crash, the world's greatest drum kits. It's truly a passion project. I wrote the book, published by Insight Editions, who's an incredible publisher, and they have a lot of great titles out. So it was an honor to be signed to them. But I wrote the book that I wanted to have as a drummer. So all of the success that I've had in my life, I've put back into having this drum collection and a drum museum as part of Frangioni Foundation. And this book is photography of all of these kits. And it's, you can read the book and really delve into the more geeky things to learn about when the kits were made and used, et cetera, and with whom. Or you can just go through the book and enjoy it by photos. Mark Weiss, the world-renowned rock photographer, took the photos of all the studio kits. So we have the kits photographed in the museum, and then we have a whole host of photos of the drummers playing those kits from archives from over the years of Buddy Rich and Ringo Starr and Alex Van Halen and Carl Palmer and Eric Singer and Neil Peart and Carmine Appice and on and on and on, playing the kits. So it's really a fun journey through all these incredible drummers and drum kits. And it's a celebration of drums as told through the stories of all of these drum kits. The cool thing about a drum kit, it's like if you had 15 of the coolest guitars in the world, it'd be one drum kit, right? Because every drum in these large kits is its own work of art, and you can do so many different things with it. So the visuals on each of these kits is so awesome and fascinating. And you can look at the book for hours and have fun, whether you just love drums or you want to inspire a young person to get into drums, or you're a drummer. Of course, it's a no-brainer at that point. But it's just a celebration of drums and drumming.
I just what was it, about 2 weeks ago, I saw a Dream Theater play.
Mike Mangini.
Yes, and that was one of the most insane drum sets I've ever seen, I think, in person.
Yeah, I bet it is. He's an insane drummer.
He's got racks above his head.
He's
reaching up over. It's intense, and I'm the kind of guy where when I play with people, if I see too many guitar pedals come out or too many drums, I get a little nervous. Where because you intend to use all of that stuff, but with that particular show, it was just a joy to watch him go around that kit and hit on every different type of drum. It was
so awesome.
It was
it's amazing. I mean, we have a Mike Portnoy Dream Theater kit in Crash. We don't have a Mike Mangini kit in there, but it's the same idea. There's these incredible drum kits. Mangini's kits are always incredible, and it's I always say it's the archer and not the arrow.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's both.
Yeah.
Right, because the arrows are so cool.
Yeah.
And Mangini's kit, as you described, he's got all those Octoban, Pearl, I think, calls them cannon drums, but all these these Octoban looking drums, as we know them, the Tama Octobans, which are those long tubular looking drums over his head. And then he's got this massive kit in front of him and 2 or 3 snare drums and all of the cymbals. And he plays them with such virtuosity
Yeah.
that it's one thing to look at the kit, then you hear him play it and watch him play it. And then it takes on a whole nother level of visual. And that's what the book does for you, you know, between seeing these drummers on YouTube and on Blu-ray, etc., and seeing the drum kits up close and personal. Because remember, by photographing every drum kit the way we did, you're getting views that you cannot get unless you literally stood on the drum riser and went from drum to drum. Right. So, I mean, other than the drum tech, the band, and the drummer himself, very few people will ever have that perspective. And that's where Crash really brings it home, because that's the perspective you get. There's a lot of close-up shots. There's a lot of shots from above and the side, and views and insight you'll never have anywhere else. And so, yeah, go to crashbook.net and register to win a copy.
Yeah, I guess it's a great education too, and just as a drummer, like all the different configurations you can come up with, and the setups. It's super cool.
Exactly. No 2 drum sets are alike, and that's what makes it so cool. And you got Buddy Rich, who plays a rack tom, a snare drum, a bass drum, and a floor tom. And the second floor tom, he used to jokingly say, was First Towel. So he's basically playing a 4-piece kit, and he sounds like he's playing 100 drums, because he's the greatest drummer of all time. And then you have, you know, drum kits that are these monster kits, and the drummers on those kits are incredible and amazing. But their music and their style works for having all of those different drums in front of them. And the visual on it is just so inspiring and brings back so many memories. The more into drums you are, or the more of a drummer that you are in terms of playing and understanding different styles and being aware of a lot of these greats, the more the book becomes like just a sponge, as you said, of information and knowledge and history. And it wasn't really intended to do that. It wasn't supposed to be a book on rock history or drum history. It's really just a collection of the coolest drum kits that have ever existed in their original form, and the drummers that played them. And it's a lot of fun.
Do you have a particular favorite?
Well, the drum kit on the cover, the Carl Palmer stainless steel drum kit. Carl was one of my drumming idols. He's actually got a drum camp coming up in November in Philadelphia that I highly recommend. It's for keyboardists, drummers, guitarists, of course, anybody into prog, but just anyone into those instruments that really wants to learn. This is a must see. This is a must attend, because I took a lesson from Carl Palmer, a long lesson, one lesson, but a long lesson. And that was in 2016, and I'm still practicing what he showed me.
Yeah.
So can you imagine 3 days of learning from Carl? It's really just an endless amount of inspiration and techniques and information that will make you a great drummer, guitarist, keyboardist for probably the rest of your life. You'll be perfecting what Carl shows you. And that's what it's all about. So that drum kit, in the stainless steel kit that Carl had with the LP, that he ended up selling to Ringo Starr, that I bought from Ringo Starr.
Oh, no way.
Which that has its own whole story to it. That kit inspired me because seeing it was absolutely jaw-dropping. I'd never seen anything like it, but I never heard anything like it. And Carl's playing on it, of course, was so extraordinary that combination inspired me so much. I literally followed the lineage of that drum kit until I ended up owning it. So that drum kit is the definition of a dream come true. And from a kid that started in Boston, Mass with nothing really, and was able to build a career up to the point where I had the opportunity and the ability to buy that kit. It's I don't want to sound dramatic, but it's really like a movie.
I think
it's a dream come true movie.
I think anyone listening can understand that.
I hope so, because anybody can do it with the work.
Yeah, that's nice to hear too. You said you got a drum museum. That was something I wasn't aware of.
Yep. Frangioni Foundation has its own drum museum as
That's so
part of its
cool.
nonprofit. It's private.
Uh-huh.
All the kits you see in Crash are in there.
Okay.
And we use it for donors and for master classes and just ways to inspire people. And I don't need all these drum kits just for me. I
Yeah.
mean, doing a book about them to share with the world for 100 years, to have a museum that inspires people and inspires the next generation of drummers, to have a place where we can do master classes with the greatest drummers in the world and have these unique experiences that shape kids' lives forever. That's a reason to have the drum collection.
Yeah.
For me to just have a drum collection and have it just be for my own use would be silly.
Right. It reminds me of being an English teacher in The Catcher in the Rye. He talks about his little brother who his older brother wrote a story about a kid that had a goldfish, and since he paid for it, he wouldn't let anyone look at the goldfish.
Yeah.
So it's cool you're not taking that route.
No. And without realizing it, just being a collector person, right? Because people either have that gene or they don't. I always had collections that, I collected. They were private collections. They were personal private collections, whether it was baseball cards or, Clint Eastwood posters. Because remember, I have the two books with Clint Eastwood Icon, which were also published by Insight Edition. And the second version of it came out last year, right before Crash. So these collections, were for me to enjoy, or my close family. And after a period of time, as I got a little bit older, it just hit me like, wait a second, this isn't very fulfilling. To find the next cool item that I didn't have, well, that's one thing, but that's not nearly as fulfilling as sharing that cool item that I just found with the collecting world and let everybody be inspired by it and everybody enjoy it. And with the drum collection, I just took that to another level because it applied to people very differently. The poster collection, the book kind of tells the whole story, but the Crash book and the drum set collection, it has much, much bigger possibilities because it impacts kids and people with the drums and music in such a big way. It can impact them. That's why I went, in the direction that I did, with not only creating the book, but creating the museum, creating the nonprofit, putting curriculums and programming together to go along with that. And then in that totality, now the drum collection is really doing some good.
That's really cool. Again, giving back.
Yep.
Very nice.
Crashbook.net.
Let me ask you, as a technologist, the drummer, do you see any future developments in like technology with drums? I mean, there's obviously like drum triggers and electronic kits. And what do you think? Anything you're excited about? I've seen like some pretty interesting things where the drums are being used as triggers for other sounds, and a lot of interesting things going on. Is there anything that excites you in that direction?
Well, a lot. Things just keep getting better and better and better. And, drum triggering, think about how far that's come and how much you can do with that. The hybrid kit is becoming now more and more of the standard, even for drummers who are mostly acoustic based, but they want that reinforcement, or they want extra colors on their kit, maybe for their solo, maybe for a certain song. And you don't have to be a full-on technology person nowadays to implement that stuff. So, I think that the shell types that acoustic drums are being made of, we're seeing so many advancements in machinery and in the possibilities of how these drums can be constructed, which gives us our improved sound of a lot of these drums, like what Yamaha did a few years ago with the PHX kit, the Phoenix kit, all those different woods that they combined. And it just keeps growing and growing. And then on the electronic technology side, how far you can take recording drums, triggering drums. And I think one of the big breakthroughs that's occurring and has been occurring for a few years now is just the ability of the triggering and the precision that we never had at this level. So you can do more with it as a player, combined with the more straightforward and streamlined technology options that'll get more drummers into this, because that's one of the genius breakthroughs that I've really seen by like Yamaha and Roland, for example, putting together products that a drummer can really get up to speed with in a day.
Yeah.
And they'll look like they're really technology savvy because they'll be doing all these really cool things with it, either recording themselves or triggering, or, you know, or both. But, you know, what's happened is people have learned more about technology than ever before by default. Because if you can navigate your way around an iPad or an iPhone or an Android, you're learning technology. And all you're really trying to do is communicate and live your life. You're not consciously thinking, oh, I'm a technology person now. But it actually pays dividends in being able to go to true technology pieces like these pieces we mentioned, Yamaha, Roland, etc., where all of a sudden, because of what you've learned and your aptitude in day-to-day technology, you can apply it to these other things. When I was starting out, there was no corresponding technology. I bought a Mac Plus computer to do sequencing on. You know, I didn't use it day to day. Later on, I used it to print invoices and some simple things behind the scenes that weren't music related, but it was 99% music. So there weren't any other technological outlets. Everything I did was very intentionally for a music technology application, and you learned it from scratch in that regard. And eventually you did it enough with enough different components that things started to all relate. But nowadays, we're not talking about somebody like David Frangioni who went out full steam, like, I'm going to pursue technology. We're just talking about people that want to make music, and we use drummers as an example. They don't really care about all the cool technology things that are going on. They don't want to be technologists, but they want the ability of and the capability of these devices. And that's what the real breakthrough that's occurred is that it's for everybody now. And what it can do, even 10 years ago, would have cost 5 times as much, and I would have been required to come in and set it up for you.
Yeah. That's a great point, because like you said, like the technology is, you know, with kids today, it's in their hand already. They're already using, they're already familiar with the interface and how it works. And that was a big part, you know, to learning a lot of technology. This was a whole other language, a whole other world to get involved in, but not so much anymore.
USB used to be something that would require me to spend 4 hours teaching people. Now a 7-year-old looks at a device and looks at another device and pops the USB stick or a USB cable from one to the other just because they're trained like, oh, this is how I make that work.
Yeah.
They don't know really what USB is doing. They just know that this goes there and all of a sudden it works.
That's so funny. I do a music production club at my school. Ableton donated these push controllers that they have. They did a really cool educational program where they were giving them the old version to the schools, and they gave a bunch to my school. And I remember the first day I had the kids take them out, and I had kids that knew nothing about music even, but they knew to plug the USB right in the back of the computer. They knew, they like just instantly knew a lot more than I thought they would.
That's awesome.
Like you said, I thought,
I mean, there it is in full living color.
I thought I was going to have to explain a lot of things that I didn't have to explain at all. They knew
years ago you would have.
Yeah.
When I started out, it had to be explained to me even.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, it's just incredible how much technology has progressed, that it's so mainstream that when we go a little bit off to the side and go, okay, now we're going to utilize music technology or MIDI technology items, it's a very, very easy jump. Now, are we talking about full rigs and complex setups and studios and facilities? No, we're not. We got to stay in the context.
Yeah.
But we're talking about just, you can do some really powerful things with the drums, especially, with low cost and high results, and not need a specialist to come in. And I know that's contrary to what I do for a living, but I don't do that for a living. I don't take simple items and set them up for people. They can do that themselves. And I'm very proud and excited for them to be able to do that because, it's such an awesome day that we have now where you can buy an item for $500 and your drum kit sounds like $1 million after you added this piece, and you can professionally record, social media clips and things like that with just really simple, low cost items because it's scaled like that. So I encourage guys to check it out and kind of remember that there is a new day. You can call a place like Sweetwater, get great feedback, or moderndrummer.com, of course. And there's a lot there.
The times are never more welcoming, I'd say, in quite a lot of ways.
Yep, agree.
Dave Frangioni, thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
Brian, it's my pleasure. This has been a blast to be here with you and your listeners. And, whenever I do a talk, a speech, a podcast, whatever it is that I'm collaborating like this, the goal for me is that everybody leaves, but each person leaves the podcast learning at least one thing. And then at that point, it's been worth the hour that we've spent together because the listeners are getting great value from it. So I think a lot of the things we talked about today, you can get at least one of them out of it and apply it to your own life and save a lot of time and get further ahead within that efficiency. And that's, that just makes it really worthwhile to do for everyone. And thank you for having this podcast so people can, better their lives.
Well, I've gotten more than one thing myself, so I thank you for that very much.
Awesome. And I have too. Thank you.
Well, we'll have to send people to crashbook.net for their chance to win a copy, but also just to check it out. Buy the book. It's on Amazon. There's we got the Frangioni Foundation too, which I'll put links to all the stuff in the show notes so people can just click on it.
Yep, davidfrangioni.co is the website, davidfrangioni.co. You can learn all things about the projects that I'm doing, the different companies that I have, and it's there's a lot going on up there.
There's a lot. And also, thank you for your work with some of my favorite artists, helping them make that stuff come to life. I appreciate it greatly because, as you know, as a musician, how music saves and helps us through our day and our lives. So I thank you for helping their visions become a reality as well.
Well, the honor's been all mine because, they're the ones that are, with the talent and the genius. And I've just been really fortunate and blessed to, work hard enough to get opportunities to be a part of those projects and contribute the way you described. So you're very welcome. And, the best is yet to come.
Yeah. And there you have it again. As people have told us before, dads and grownups, the hard work is where it's at. That's where the big payoff is.
Absolutely. No substitute. Hard work, man. You got to work hard and you got to be consistent. You got to be disciplined. It sounds so simple until, somebody says, well, how do I look like Sylvester Stallone? Well, eat right and exercise. We'll see how simple that is.
Yeah.
So it's, there's a lot that goes into it. You've really got to learn your craft. And while you're doing that, put the work in. It takes sacrifice. It takes discipline. It takes time. But, you'd be surprised at how quickly everything moves when you put the hard work in and you start to see the results. Mm-hmm. And it starts to become fun at some point that, wow, I'm actually getting somewhere. This is actually worth it, but there's no instant gratification. It'll come, but you got to do the work, and it's not going to happen on your timeline. It's going to happen on whatever the universe's timeline is. So you got to stick with it. And just know that if you really believe in what you're doing and you do put the work in, that there is a result coming that will be fulfilling and will be worth it.
Well said and very inspiring. Thank you so much, man.
All right, Brian. Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for listening. Definitely head out to crashbook.net, Frangioni Foundation. davidfrangioni.co. All the stuff is in the show notes. Check it out. Lots of good stuff. Lots of wisdom, great experience, and If you're a musician, you're going to love it. So thanks everyone for listening. Thank you again, David.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Take care.